The torchlight quivers along damp stone like a heartbeat you can see, and through a rusted gate a whisper crawls in these cursed halls. Beauty was bought with blood. A noblewoman swore that youth could be bottled, weighed, warmed, then poured into a bath as red as midnight. Stay with me, because what they found beneath the torture chamber floor will make your pulse forget its rhythm. And before we lift the first lid on this darkness, hit subscribe and ring the bell if you dare to keep looking where others looked away. Eastern Europe in the age of thunderclaps and thrones, a country of iron winters and iron wills. She was born to power, trained to command the weight of rooms, and taught that appearance was a kind of currency. Yet grief slit a seam in her world when her husband died, and into that seam poured superstition. Court physicians muttered recipes. Alchemists sold phantoms by the vial, and an old crone whispered a secret that would turn longing into a weapon. It began, or so the legend swears, with a scratch and a scream, a maid's cheek nicked by a jeweled ring, a single drop falling onto pale skin. The Countess studied the mirror and decided the drop had polished her youth the way rain polishes marble. The story could have ended as vanity's joke, but hunger learned her name and came knocking. From that night she listened for remedies in the sound of dripping wax. Her estate became a labyrinth of hushed doors that shut themselves, corridor drafts that smelled of iron. A bell rung softly after midnight. Servants noticed that new girls arrived at dusk and were never seen at breakfast. A priest passing by felt the house watch him the way a hawk watches a field. In the kitchens, the old crone brewed herbs dark as ravens and told the mistress warmth binds essence, heat will coax the secret out. The first ritual was clumsy, almost domestic steaming baths, scented cloths, a silver ewer sweating beside a marble basin. The girl chosen was promised embroidery work and a roof against winter. The Countess kept her voice low and her breaths measured as if gentleness could mask intention. A muffled cry rose, then another, then silence like velvet. Afterward, the mistress studied her hands, turning them slowly, convinced new light woke beneath the skin. Whispers lifted like fog in the villages. Mothers hid their daughters under floorboards. A stable boy swore he heard water slosh at impossible hours. Traders said the lady bought lye and salt in odd quantities and paid with coins too clean. In a tavern corner, a traveling tinker spoke of nobles who feared time more than swords. And riding home through pines that clicked like teeth, a young deacon decided fear was not proof, but it was reason. The lady's steward kept ledgers that looked at a glance like inventories of wool and candles. Look again, and the columns became colder. Initials, ages, the word suitable, and beside it a symbol that meant blooming. The steward had a stoic face and a sad mouth, and every time he wrote the symbol, his jaw tightened. He told himself the girls found better homes. He told himself many things. His quill told the truth. Inside the fortress rooms, molded into functions no architect had intended, a washroom turned laboratory, a winter parlor walled with screens, a drain freshly cut into old stone. The crone oversaw heat and timing while the mistress practiced stillness the way soldiers practice aim. Candles burned low and steady. Cloths were folded like prayers. The house learned to breathe in long, careful sighs as if exhaling might summon witnesses. A cousin from another county arrived with condolences and curiosity, wearing a lace ruff and questions. Over venison and black bread, he asked why the corridors smelled faintly of singed linen at noon. The lady smiled with a controlled softness and spoke of renovations. Later, the cousin touched a balustrade and felt it tremble, not from wind, but memory. That night he dreamed of water that wouldn't cool and woke to a bell he could not locate. The first body surfaced not from stone but from rumor. A cart overturned near a ravine. A bundle slid loose, a hand pale as milk revealed to moonlight. The constable who found it knelt and crossed himself and noticed wrists rubbed raw as if the last prayer had been a struggle against rope. He went to the manor with a politeness that weighed a ton and asked for a list of servants. The steward offered a ledger, but the page with last month's names was missing neatly. The village square became a hive of whispers, women clutching shawls, tighter men muttering into mugs, children told not to stray after dusk. One widow swore she saw a wagon draped in canvas rolling uphill by torchlight, the outline beneath shifting as though alive. The priest pressed her hand and urged silence, but her eyes burned with grief. Her daughter had vanished the week before, and silence was a coffin she would not lie in. Inside the manor, the Countess stood before her mirror as dawn cracked gray. Her skin powdered her lips a shade too bright. She leaned forward, studying the smoothness running her fingers along her cheek as if testing a sculpture. Outside, frost clung to the windows like breath held too long, and from somewhere deep in the foundations came the faint metallic echo of chains tightening, loosening, then tightening again. Her obsession demanded more precision, more ritual. No longer crude accidents, but ceremonies basins lined with brass oils mixed to mask the smell attendants trained to move without sound. The crone directed them with a crook of the finger the steward recorded, without looking up, and the mistress closed her eyes as steam rose around her, believing for a fleeting instant that eternity was not a lie but a recipe. Yet with every ritual cracks spread wider through her household, maids glanced at one another and forgot to bow. Guards lingered too long at their posts, and in the kitchens, a boy refused to eat meat, claiming it tasted of grief. One chambermaid, trembling, slipped a note beneath the church door. "The walls drink more than wine here." The priest read it by candlelight, his hand shaking, and swore his parish would not become a graveyard by silence. A storm rolled over the countryside, shaking shutters and flooding fields. Inside, the mistress took the weather as a sign, telling her attendants, "The heavens weep because they envy me." But envy has teeth. And as lightning illuminated her face, the mirror flashed something else. Eyes, hollowed cheeks, sharp. A beauty, too forced, too stolen. She flinched just for a breath before forcing her smile back into its cage. The villagers gathered courage like kindling. A delegation of fathers marched to the manor gates demanding their daughters. The guards sneered steel flashing in the rain, and the men returned to the tavern defeated. But seeds had been sown, and in hushed tones they vowed to find proof to gather witness. Meanwhile, in the manor's lowest chamber, a basin overflowed, dripping crimson into cracks where even stone seemed unwilling to hold such weight. The steward's conscience gnawed him. In sleepless hours, he scratched notes into scraps of parchment, half confession, half plea. "I see their faces in the wax. I hear them in the pipes. Forgive me." He hid the notes beneath loose planks, praying no one would find them. Little did he know that decades later those scraps would be unearthed, fragile but legible. Each word a nail in the mistress's coffin. Her cousin returned once more, this time uninvited, his cloak heavy with suspicion. He walked the corridors slowly, dragging his fingers along the stone, listening for false walls. He paused by a locked door behind which silence pressed too hard, like breath held on the other side. When he asked what lay within, the mistress's smile froze a fraction too long. Over supper, she changed the subject, but in the candlelight her cousin swore he saw a faint crimson stain beneath her nails. By now, stories spread far beyond the village. Travelers carried them to markets and courts, tales of a lady who wove youth from blood of a castle that devoured daughters. Some dismissed it as superstition. Others leaned in closer, eyes wide. And in those retellings, fact and fear braided so tightly they became indistinguishable. The Countess herself transforming into legend even before her fall. But legend is a dangerous veil. It emboldens the guilty and terrifies the innocent. The Countess believed her wealth would silence officials, her rank shield her from scrutiny. Yet power attracts attention, and attention breeds inquiry. Late one evening, as she dined on roast pheasant under chandeliers, word reached her that a royal investigator was riding toward the estate, armed not with swords but with questions. And questions once asked can be sharper than any blade. The investigator arrived beneath a sky the color of iron. his horse stamping nervously as if sensing what lay within the castle walls. He was not young, but his eyes were sharp, trained to pierce through courtly smiles. At the gates, the guards bowed stiffly, their hands twitching at their swords. Yet the investigator merely raised a hand and said, "I am here on His Majesty's orders open for secrets fester worse than plague." Inside the hall, the Countess received him in silks, her jewels flashing like sparks against the gloom. She curtsied with calculated grace, her voice sweet, her laugh rehearsed. But the investigator noticed the faint smell beneath the perfume, the way the servants lowered their eyes too quickly, the tremor in the steward's hands as he poured wine. Each detail was a thread, and he intended to pull until the tapestry unraveled. He asked to see the ledgers, pretending disinterest. The steward hesitated, then fetched the books, but certain pages had been excised clean, leaving ragged scars in the binding. "Strange," the investigator murmured. "Paper disappears as quickly here as people do." The Countess smiled too widely and dismissed it as accounting errors. But in her chest, a pulse of dread struck like a hammer on iron. At night, the investigator prowled the corridors, lantern in hand, ears pricked to the creaks and sighs of old stone. In the distance, he thought he heard a muffled cry, but when he hurried toward it, the sound dissolved into silence. Later, he found droplets along a stairwell, dark-dried, unmistakable. He crouched, touched, and whispered, "Blood has a way of testifying even when tongues are cut." The Countess, sensing danger, grew bolder in defiance. She hosted banquets with laughter echoing like broken bells, offered guests wine until their cheeks flushed, and made veiled jests about the vitality of youth. Yet in her chambers, she clawed at her mirror, staring at hollows beneath her eyes, wondering why no ritual ever lasted, why beauty always leaked away like water through a sieve. One evening, the investigator confronted the steward in private, his voice low but edged with steel. "I know what you've hidden. The question is whether you will carry her sins to your grave or let the dead finally rest." The steward's mask cracked, tears welled, his lips trembled, and at last he pressed a bundle of parchments into the man's hand, whispering, "Forgive me. I was weak." Those parchments were damning names, dates, symbols matching missing girls. Diagrams of chambers, notes about heating water and collecting blood. The investigator's stomach twisted as he read, but he pressed on, knowing truth could rot if not exposed. Outside, wolves howled, and in their voices he felt a grim chorus as if the earth itself demanded justice. The next day, he returned to the great hall, unrolled the parchments before the Countess, and let silence weigh like chains. Her face flickered first shock, then fury, then a smile sharp as a blade. "Lies!" she hissed, scribbles of cowards meant to tarnish nobility. But her hand trembled on the goblet, a single drop of wine spilling down her wrist like a red accusation. Word of the documents spread faster than fire and straw. Villagers stormed the gates with torches, mothers shouting the names of lost daughters, fathers swearing vengeance. The guards, once loyal, shifted uneasily, some lowering weapons rather than raise them against their own kin. For the first time, the mistress's fortress felt less like a palace and more like a cage tightening around her. That night, as thunder rolled, the investigator and a band of soldiers broke open a door long barred. The hinges screamed, dust billowed, and the stench of iron and decay slammed into them. Inside, they found chains bolted to walls, basins stained dark, and garments folded neatly beside beds that would never hold sleepers again. One soldier fell to his knees and vomited, another crossed himself again and again. The investigator only whispered, "May God forgive what man allowed." The castle's underbelly was worse than any nightmare, narrow tunnels slick with moisture chambers carved crudely from rock, and in one alcove a trough still half filled with thickened crimson. Rats scattered as torches flared, and on the walls, scratched into stone by desperate fingernails, were names, prayers, and the word mother repeated until it blurred into madness. The soldiers recoiled, yet the investigator pressed forward, muttering that the dead must not be left voiceless. When dawn rose gray and sickly, the Countess was confined to her chambers. She demanded her mirror, shrieking that she must see her face, that she must know if her beauty remained. But when they finally brought it, the glass seemed to betray her, reflecting not youth, but a gaunt woman. Eyes, hollow lips cracked. She slapped the mirror until it shattered, slicing her palm, and with bitter laughter smeared her blood across her cheeks as though it might restore what time had stolen. The trial convened in a cold hall. Villagers packed shoulder to shoulder, their breaths clouding the air. Witnesses trembled as they spoke, telling of daughters promised work and never seen again, of screams muffled by stone, of wagons creaking at midnight. When the steward was called, he confessed through tears, his words tumbling like stones, and each name he spoke was a dagger plunged into silence's heart. The crowd wept, raged, and crossed themselves. The Countess sat in regal defiance, clad in black velvet, her chin high though her wrists were bound. She scoffed at the testimonies, accused the villagers of envy, and claimed the priest had conspired against her. But when the parchments were displayed, ink faded yet still legible. Her mask slipped for an instant, eyes darting, lips twitching before she regained composure. The investigator watched closely, knowing that truth always flickers, however briefly. As the verdict drew near, tension strangled the hall. Some whispered she would be executed by fire, others that her rank would save her. In the end, the judgment was peculiar and cruel. She was not to face the blade nor the noose, but to be sealed inside her own castle, walled into a tower room with only a slit for food and water. The people cheered not for mercy, but for justice that felt poetic, a tomb built from her own pride. The day she was bricked in, the villagers gathered in silence, watching masons lay stone upon stone. She stood at the narrow window, her face pale yet still defiant, hurling curses in a voice that cracked the sky. Mothers clutched children closer, fathers spat into the mud, and the priest whispered prayers louder to drown her venom. When the final stone was set, the cheers erupted, echoing like thunder across the hills. Life resumed in the villages, yet shadows lingered. Daughters stepped into sunlight cautiously, as if daylight alone might not protect them. In taverns, men retold the story with trembling voices, embellishing details until fact and folklore tangled. Some claimed her screams could still be heard on storm nights, clawing against the stones of her tomb. Others swore her ghost walked the battlements, her skin pale as frost, forever hunting what she had lost. Years passed, moss grew over the tower walls, and ivy crept like veins across stone. Travelers spoke of the ruined castle as cursed, and children dared one another to touch the gates. Inside, dust thickened, silence deepened. Yet sometimes, just sometimes, a faint sound echoed, as though nails still scratched the walls from within. Whether it was memory or haunting, no one dared stay long enough to decide. Historians later debated, was she a monster born of cruelty, or a woman trapped by vanity and madness amplified by power? Some argued the stories exaggerated, spun into legend by enemies. Others insisted the evidence was undeniable, the names too many, the bones too real. What none could deny was the fear she left behind, a fear that still clung to villages long after her body had withered away. And so the tale endured, passed from lips to ink, from ink to stage, from stage to screen. She became a cautionary figure, a symbol of beauty's corruption, a name invoked to frighten or to fascinate. Her story forces us to ask, how far will humanity go to escape the mirror's truth? And more chilling still, what horrors are we ignoring today, simply because those who commit them wear crowns, jewels, or silken smiles? The legend of the Blood Countess seeped into lullabies, twisted into warnings. Mothers hushed children with verses that spoke of a lady who drank the dawn from girls' veins, who bathed in innocence to fight the years. Though sung softly, the songs carried thorns, reminding every ear that beauty purchased with cruelty always curdles into horror. And so, the younger generations grew up fearing not only the dark, but also the vanity of those in power. Among scholars, debates sharpened like blades. Some unearthed fragments of diaries that hinted at rituals, while others dismissed them as inventions of envious rivals. Yet each time a new scrap surfaced, names, tally marks, instructions for warming basins, the whispers rekindled. One archivist, after reading too much by candlelight, confessed he dreamed of dripping footsteps echoing behind him though the hall was empty. The ruined tower became a site of pilgrimage, not of reverence, but of dread. Villagers left flowers, crosses, or dolls at the base, hoping to appease whatever restless force lingered. On storm nights, those offerings vanished, scattered by wind or something less merciful. A shepherd once claimed he saw pale hands clawing through the ivy, only to vanish as lightning struck. Centuries later, dramatists and poets seized her tale, weaving plays where she was depicted with flowing hair eyes like coals and gowns stained scarlet. Audiences shivered, applauded, and carried the story home where it merged with local fears and new folklore. Thus her crimes became immortal, not because of what was proven, but because of what people believed, and belief can make phantoms more enduring than flesh. In hushed circles, alchemists whispered that her obsession was not unique, that across Europe nobles experimented with blood mercury or stranger elixirs in their search for immortality. Hers was simply the tale that grew too large, too grotesque to be contained. And though she was entombed, her shadow stretched over courts and chambers where vanity still ruled with a velvet fist. Travelers wrote of the castle's silence, yet some insisted the air felt heavy, as if it carried unshed screams. One chronicler recounted how his horse refused to step across the threshold, frothing and trembling, until he abandoned the idea of entering. He wrote, "The walls themselves hold memory, and I dared not ask what they remembered." The priest who had once defied her died an old man, but in his final sermons he warned, "It is not only she who sinned, but all who stayed silent, all who let fear outweigh truth." His words echoed down generations, reminding the people that monsters flourish in shadows, built by collective silence. His grave, modest and unmarked by grandeur, became a quiet counterpoint to her looming ruin. Legends spread that treasure lay buried beneath the tower, hidden by her in frantic nights. Fortune hunters dug, breaking through roots and rubble, yet most fled before finishing, swearing they felt eyes in the dark. One claimed he uncovered a chest, but found it filled not with gold, but with broken mirrors, shards glinting like teeth reflecting his own terrified face back at him. In modern times, scientists studied the myths, noting that human blood contains compounds once believed to rejuvenate. Experiments on youth and aging gave the old folklore a sinister relevance, suggesting that beneath the horror lay a kernel of science misunderstood. Suddenly, her tale was not only medieval madness, but a mirror held up to modern obsessions with beauty and eternal youth. And so her shadow lingers not just in ruined stone or whispered song, but in the cosmetics that promise miracles in the clinics where needles trade money for youth, in the endless advertisements that whisper defy time. Perhaps the Blood Countess was only the most brutal expression of a hunger that never truly died. And if so, we must ask ourselves, what price are we willing to pay for beauty, and whose blood is spilled unseen to preserve it? The centuries rolled on, but the tower remained sealed, a mausoleum of stone, where her voice had once clawed at the walls. Children dared each other to creep close and press their ears against the cold rock. Some swearing they heard faint scratching from within. Others claiming a woman's laughter hissed through the ivy. Whether imagination or haunting, the terror endured, binding the community to her ghost as firmly as mortar bound the bricks. Folklorists collected testimonies from villagers who treated the ruins like a wound that never healed. One gray-haired farmer told them, "The land here never grew sweet again. Even the apples taste of iron." His words spread printed in pamphlets that mixed history with myth, cementing her as both woman and monster. And in every retelling, the number of her victims grew, as if memory itself demanded to exaggerate the horror so no one could forget. Artists painted her visage endlessly, hair cascading like black silk hands, pale and cruel gowns soaked in crimson light. Yet in each painting, the eyes shifted, sometimes hollow with guilt, other times blazing with pride. Museums displayed her portrait as both caution and spectacle, and viewers stared too long, caught between revulsion and fascination. The very same spell she had once cast in life. In taverns and parlors, storytellers embellished the tale with details no court ever proved, of fountains running red, of servants forced to polish mirrors until their reflections wept, of wolves gathering at the walls to howl as rituals took place. Fact was buried under folklore, but the result was more enduring, a nightmare too captivating to release. The castle itself became a stage for the imagination. Travelers described hearing footsteps pacing overhead when the tower was long empty, or smelling candle wax, though no flame had burned for decades. Even skeptics admitted a heaviness clung there, as if grief and cruelty had seeped so deeply into stone that they became permanent inhabitants. Philosophers seized her story as parable, a meditation on power, unrestrained on vanity, that mutates into tyranny, on how silence by the many enables monstrosity by the few. Essays were penned that compared her to tyrants of every century, insisting that though her methods were medieval, her hunger for control was timeless. Meanwhile, villagers kept smaller, more intimate memories alive. One family claimed to guard a rosary once dropped by a victim, another swore their attic contained a shawl left behind by a girl who never returned. Such relics, whether authentic or imagined, became anchors of grief, proof that behind the legend lay real bodies, real daughters whose names deserved to be spoken. In the 19th century, the castle was briefly open to scholars. They found rusted chains fused to stone pits, blackened with age, and fragments of bone too small to catalog. The reports horrified the public, yet fascination only deepened, and tourists flocked to see the ruins, snapping sketches and later photographs, eager to capture a piece of darkness to carry home. Writers of Gothic novels turned her life into archetype: the beautiful woman who devours innocence, the aristocrat whose palace hides torture chambers, the mirror that reflects not youth but corruption. In their pages she walked again, haunting candlelit ballrooms and icy corridors, a phantom draped in silk and shadow. Through fiction, she achieved the immortality she had once pursued through blood. Today, her name remains synonymous with horror. Documentaries retell her story, films exaggerate her rituals, and every Halloween her shadow flickers once more. Yet beneath all the spectacle lies the core truth that unchecked power fed by vanity and shielded by silence can consume a society. The Countess may be gone. Her tower crumbled, but the hunger she embodied, the refusal to accept time, the willingness to harm others. For beauty still prowls among us in new disguises. Some researchers argue that the true horror was not just in her acts, but in the system that allowed them. Nobles, priests, and soldiers alike looked away until the whispers became too loud, their silence serving as mortar for her empire of cruelty. In this sense, her crimes were collective, a mirror reflecting how power corrupts not only the wielder, but also those who choose comfort over conscience. Villagers told their grandchildren of the nights when the castle windows glowed faintly red, as if lanterns burned behind curtains, but no lanterns ever did. Some said it was the souls of the lost trapped inside lighting their way to the afterlife in endless failure. Others whispered that it was her spirit still bathing in phantom blood, eternally repeating the ritual even after her flesh had decayed. The priest's final diary, preserved in a monastery, recounted dreams that plagued him, visions of rivers turning crimson, of hands clawing from beneath the altar, of a noblewoman laughing as her face shifted between youth and withered bone. He wrote, "If her soul has not found peace, then neither has the land she cursed." His words became prophecy to villagers who believed storms and sickness were punishments born from her unquiet ghost. Even modern visitors report uncanny sensations, sudden chills in midsummer, the scent of iron in empty rooms, the echo of footsteps that never match their own. Skeptics dismiss it as imagination primed by legend, but those who leave swear they carry the weight of the place with them. A heaviness that lingers in dreams and in mirrors that seem to hold shadows longer than they should. Anthropologists see her story as a metaphor for society's fear of women wielding power unchecked, pointing out how many details may have been exaggerated to paint her as monstrous. Yet even if myth eclipsed reality, the bones discovered beneath the stones testify that something terrible occurred, something no legend could fully exaggerate away. Poets continue to resurrect her in stanzas dripping with crimson imagery, comparing her thirst for youth to humanity's endless pursuit of immortality. Lines about mirrors, chains, and roses blooming from blood-stained soil fill anthologies reminding readers that horror often dresses itself in beauty's garments, making it harder to resist, harder to recognize until it is too late. Historians note that her downfall shifted perceptions of nobility. After her trial courts across Europe tightened scrutiny of aristocrats, whispers of another Báthory enough to spark investigations. In this way, her atrocities indirectly forged reforms, proving that even horror can become catalyst for change, though at a cost written in screams. The tower eventually collapsed, its stones stolen for barns and roads, but villagers say the land where it stood remains barren. Grass refuses to grow, thick trees twist strangely, and animals shy away. Children dare one another to spend a night there, but most flee before midnight, claiming they hear dripping water that isn't water at all. Her name has since become shorthand for vanity, corrupted, invoked in psychology lectures, referenced in novels, adapted in horror films. She is not just history, but archetype, the eternal reminder that beauty pursued without morality devours both the victim and the seeker. Each retelling sharpens her shadow, ensuring she is never forgotten. And so the story closes, not with her scream, but with ours, with the shiver that crawls when we look in the mirror too long, with the unease when we see obsession with youth, mirrored in modern rituals, gentler perhaps, but no less desperate. Her tower has fallen, her body turned to dust. Yet the hunger she embodied still walks among us, dressed differently, speaking softly but ready always to spill blood for beauty's sake. So ask yourself, what horrors are we ignoring today while pretending they are only legend?